peaceful flight was suddenly interrupted by a flock of angry birds refusing to leave the plane. As chaos unfolded mid-air, the pilot's discovery led to an immediate heart-stopping decision to land. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Flight 237 soared steadily at 30,000 feet. The Boeing 737 carried 162 passengers and a crew of 6, all settled in for their 3-hour journey from Chicago to Denver. Captain Sarah Miller, a veteran pilot with 15 years of experience, sat in the cockpit, her eyes scanning the instruments before her. At 42, Sarah was known for her calm demeanor and sharp instincts. Her co-pilot, Tom Chen, 35, sat beside her, occasionally adjusting controls and confirming their flight path. But at 7:42 p.m., something extraordinary happened. A flash of movement caught Sarah's eye. She blinked, certain that she must be seeing things, but there it was again, multiple birds flying alongside the aircraft. Sarah leaned closer to the window, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "Tom, are you seeing this?" she asked, her voice tight with confusion. Tom looked up from the instrument panel, his eyes widening as he took in the sight. A flock of sandpipers, medium-sized shorebirds known for their long-distance migrations, was swarming around the plane. Their wings beat furiously against the wind, their bodies a blur of motion against the darkening sky. "That's impossible," Tom muttered, shaking his head. "Sandpipers don't fly this high." "And how are they keeping up with us?" As if in response to Tom's question, the birds began tapping urgently on the cockpit windows. Their beaks made sharp, insistent sounds against the glass, creating a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. In all her years of flying, she had never encountered anything like this. The birds typically scattered at the approach of an aircraft, their survival instincts kicking in. But these sandpipers were different. They seemed determined, almost desperate, to get the pilot's attention. "They're not dispersing," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched as the birds continued their frantic dance around the plane, defying both logic and the laws of nature. In the passenger cabin, people were starting to notice. Gasps and murmurs of surprise rippled through the rows as more and more passengers caught sight of the bizarre spectacle outside their windows. Back in the cockpit, Sarah's mind raced. Her training had prepared her for a multitude of scenarios: engine failures, severe weather, even hijacking attempts. But nothing in any flight manual could have readied her for this. She knew she needed to make a decision, and fast. As the tapping intensified and the flock grew larger, Sarah realized that this was more than just a strange occurrence. Something was wrong, and these birds, for whatever reason, were trying to tell them. With a deep breath, Sarah turned to Tom, her face set with determination. "We need to figure out what's going on," she said firmly, "and I have a feeling that these birds are the key to understanding it." Little did Sarah know that this moment would mark the beginning of one of the most extraordinary flights of her career, one that would change everything she thought she knew about flying, nature, and the hidden connections between the two. As the sandpipers continued to tap on the plane's exterior, the atmosphere inside Flight 237 shifted from mild curiosity to growing alarm. Passengers in the main cabin, initially captivated by the unusual sight, now exchanged worried glances as murmurs of anxiety spread through the cabin. The flight attendant sprang into action. Lead Attendant Maria Rodriguez, a petite woman in her early 40s with streaks of grey in her dark hair, took charge of the situation. Maria's voice came over the intercom, steady and calm, despite the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant speaking. We're experiencing an unusual situation with some local wildlife. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Captain Miller and her crew are handling the situation, and there's no immediate danger. Despite Maria's reassurances, panic began to ripple through the cabin. In first class, Richard Thornton, a CEO used to being in control, unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. "This is unacceptable," he boomed. "I demand to speak to the captain immediately." At the back of the plane, elderly couple George and Martha Williams held hands tightly, whispering prayers. Martha's rosary beads clicked softly as her trembling fingers moved from one bead to the next. In the cockpit, Captain Sarah Miller and co-pilot Tom Chen were engrossed in an intense discussion. The persistent tapping of beaks against the window created an unsettling rhythm, underlining the urgency of their situation. Tom, usually the picture of composure, ran a hand through his short black hair, his concern evident. "Sarah, we need to do something," he said, his eyes darting between the instruments and the window. "What if they damage the engines? We could be looking at a serious situation here." Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. In her 15 years of flying, she'd faced her share of challenges: severe turbulence, medical emergencies, even a lightning strike once. But this was unprecedented. She thought of the US Airways flight that had landed on the Hudson River after a bird strike. While that crew had managed a miraculous landing, Sarah knew they couldn't count on such luck. "You're right," Tom Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the pressure weighing on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, centering herself. "We need to protect the aircraft. Let's try to outpace them. It goes against everything I know about bird behavior, but we don't have many options right now." Sarah reached for the throttle, her hand steady. She keyed the radio, her voice clear and professional. "Trans Global 237 to air traffic control. We're dealing with an unusual bird situation and need to increase speed. Requesting clearance for altitude change to 33,000 feet. As they waited for a response, Sarah glanced at Tom. His typically cheerful expression had transformed into one of intense concentration, reflecting her own feelings of uncertainty and resolve. The radio crackled to life. "Trans Global 237, this is a TC. Clearance granted for 33,000 feet. Can you provide more details on your situation?" Sarah responded briefly, knowing that the full explanation would sound unbelievable even to experienced air traffic controllers. With clearance received, Sarah eased the plane higher and gradually increased their speed. The powerful Rolls-Royce engines of the Boeing 737 roared louder, their vibrations rippling through the fuselage. Sarah felt the familiar surge of acceleration, a sensation that usually filled her with excitement. Today it was tinged with anxiety. For a moment their plan seemed to work. The persistent tapping faded, and the birds fell behind, becoming small specks in the distance. Sarah allowed herself a small sigh of relief, exchanging a hopeful glance with Tom. But their reprieve was short-lived. To their astonishment, the flock of sandpipers quickly regained ground. They streamed past the windows, their wings beating furiously against the high-altitude winds. It was as if they were driven by an unseen force, their determination defying all natural laws. "Impossible," Tom muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "How are they keeping up with us at this speed and altitude?" Sarah's mind whirled, sifting through years of accumulated knowledge about aviation and nature. In her pilot training and subsequent years of flying, she had learned about various bird species and their flight capabilities. Suddenly, a piece of information clicked into place. "Tom," she said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and growing unease. "These aren't just any birds, they're migratory sandpipers. I remember reading about them. They're known for incredible navigation skills and endurance. Some can fly for days without stopping, covering thousands of miles." As this realization sank in, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions: admiration for these remarkable creatures, confusion about their bizarre behavior, and a deepening sense of concern. These birds were capable of far more than she had initially thought. But that still didn't explain why they seemed so intent on interfering with the flight. The relentless tapping resumed, a constant reminder that their unusual problem was far from solved. Sarah knew she needed to find another solution, and fast. As she scanned her instruments and the sky beyond, she couldn't shake the feeling that these persistent birds were trying to tell her something crucial, something that might make the difference between a safe flight and a potential disaster. With renewed determination, Sarah turned to Tom. "We need to think outside the box here. It's either these birds are trying to tell us something, or we need to figure out how to outrun them before it's too late." Captain Sarah Miller took a deep breath, her mind racing through potential solutions. The persistent tapping of the sandpiper beaks against the windows had become a haunting rhythm, echoing the urgency of their situation. "Tom," she said, turning to her co-pilot, "let's try something different. We need to change the environment and see if we can calm these birds down." Tom nodded, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "What do you have in mind?" "First, let's dim the cabin lights," Sarah replied, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "And we'll ask the crew to reduce noise as much as possible. Maybe if we create a calmer atmosphere, the birds will lose interest and leave on their own." As the lights in the cabin dimmed, a collective murmur of confusion rippled through the passengers. Maria Rodriguez, the lead flight attendant, quickly took charge, her voice calm and reassuring as it came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're adjusting the cabin environment to address our unusual situation. Please remain in your seats, keep your voices low, and stay calm. We appreciate your cooperation." Despite Maria's soothing words, whispers of fear and speculation filled the air. In seat 17A, David Chen, an ornithology student, leaned forward, his eyes wide with fascination. "This is unprecedented," he whispered to his seatmate. "Sandpipers don't behave like this. Something must be driving them." As the minutes ticked by, Sarah and Tom watched intently, hoping to see the birds disperse. But to their dismay, the opposite occurred. The sandpipers became even more agitated, their movements growing increasingly erratic around the aircraft. "This isn't working," Tom said, his voice tight with frustration. "If anything, they seem more determined now." Sarah nodded grimly. "You're right. We need more input." She reached for the radio, contacting the airport's wildlife control team. After a brief explanation of their bizarre situation, she waited anxiously for their response. The wildlife expert's voice crackled over the radio, a mix of confusion and professional interest evident in his tone. "Captain, I've never heard of anything like this. Sandpipers are typically coastal birds, and this behavior is completely out of character." As Sarah watched the birds' persistent behavior, a new idea began to form in her mind. It was unconventional and potentially risky, but she felt compelled to try it. "Tom," she said, her voice low and determined, "I'm going to reduce our speed slightly. I want to observe these birds more closely. There's something about their behavior I can't shake. I feel like they're trying to tell us something." Tom's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he nodded, trusting Sarah's instincts. "All right, Sarah, I'm with you." As the plane's speed decreased, Sarah's eyes remained fixed on the flock of sandpipers outside. At first their movements seemed as chaotic as before, but as the minutes passed, a pattern began to emerge. Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing as she realized what she was seeing. "Tom, do you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom nodded, his eyes wide with astonishment. There they are, forming a pattern, always moving towards the starboard side. Indeed, the birds had organized themselves into a clear formation, consistently gesturing towards the right side of the aircraft. Their movements were deliberate, almost as if they were trying to guide the plane. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Tom," she said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and confusion, "these birds are trying to lead us somewhere. But why?" Just then, a sudden and violent shudder rocked the plane. The vibration rippled through the fuselage, causing overhead compartments to rattle and passengers to gasp in surprise and fear. Sarah's hands instinctively tightened on the controls, her years of training kicking in as she fought to stabilize the aircraft. Beside her, Tom's face was a mask of concentration as he scanned the instrument panels. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice tense but controlled. Before Tom could respond, another violent tremor shook the plane. In the main cabin, the seatbelt signs blinked on with an urgent chime. Maria Rodriguez, the lead flight attendant, immediately took action. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice came over the intercom, steady despite the circumstances, "please return to your seats immediately and fasten your seat belts. Secure any loose items and remain calm." Outside the windows, the once clear blue sky was undergoing a disturbing transformation. Sarah's gut twisted with unease as she observed the bizarre phenomenon. In all her years of flying, she had never seen anything like this, a grey, dark atmosphere mixed with green. "Tom, what are you seeing on the instruments?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with tension. Tom's brow furrowed as he double-checked the readings. "That's the thing, Sarah. According to our instruments, we've got clear skies, no storms, no turbulence, nothing that could explain this." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The disconnect between what their eyes were seeing and what the instruments were reporting was deeply unsettling. As a pilot, she had always relied on her instruments, trusting them even when her senses told her otherwise. But now, faced with this inexplicable situation, she found herself questioning everything she knew. In the cabin, passengers reacted with a mix of fear and confusion. Richard Thornton, the CEO who had earlier demanded to speak to the captain, now sat rigidly in his first-class seat, his face pale. "This can't be happening," he muttered to himself, knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. Further back, David Chen, the ornithology student, was furiously scribbling notes in a small notebook. Despite the fear evident in his eyes, his scientific curiosity was piqued. "First the birds, now this," he murmured. There has to be a connection. As the green-grey haze outside intensified, the plane continued to shudder intermittently. Each tremor sent a wave of gasps and muffled cries through the cabin. Parents held their children close, couples clasped hands, and solo travelers closed their eyes, some in prayer, others in an attempt to shut out the frightening reality around them. Back in the cockpit, Sarah and Tom exchanged worried glances. The contradiction between their visual observations and instrument readings was more than unsettling, it was potentially dangerous. How could they navigate safely if they couldn't trust either their eyes or their instruments? Sarah's mind raced, trying to reconcile the bizarre situation with her years of training and experience. The persistent sandpipers, still visible through the green haze, continued their strange behavior, seemingly unaffected by the atmospheric changes. The green sky outside seemed to pulse as if alive, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had entered a realm where the normal rules of aviation and perhaps even physics no longer applied. With growing dread, Sarah realized that they were on their own. Whatever was happening, whatever force had brought them to this point, it was up to her to find a way through it. As the plane trembled again, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. Despite the bizarre green sky outside and the continued shuddering of the aircraft, she knew she had to follow protocol. With a deep breath, she opened a channel to air traffic control. "Denver Center, this is Flight 237. We're experiencing severe turbulence and unusual atmospheric conditions. Requesting immediate assistance and a weather update." There was a moment of tense silence before the controller's voice crackled through, clear and calm. Flight 237, this is Denver Center. We're showing clear skies in your vicinity. Can you clarify the conditions you're experiencing? Sarah and Tom exchanged bewildered glances. Tom shook his head in disbelief, his usual composure slipping. "How is that possible?" he muttered. Sarah described the green sky and the violent shaking of the aircraft, her voice steady despite the growing knot of fear in her stomach. The controller's response was professional but tinged with confusion. "Flight 237, we have no data indicating any weather disturbances in your area. All our readings show optimal flying conditions." But as another tremor rocked the plane, Sarah felt torn between her training and her instincts. Years of experience told her to trust her instruments and the guidance of a TC, but the undeniable physical evidence, the shaking of the plane, the eerily altered sky screamed that something was terribly wrong. In that moment, Sarah's eyes were drawn to the persistent flock of sandpipers, still visible through the green haze. Their determined formation, always gesturing to the starboard side, suddenly took on new significance. Realization dawned, sending a chill down her spine. These birds, guided by some ancient instinct beyond human understanding, had sensed a danger that even their sophisticated instruments couldn't detect. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place: the birds' unusual behavior, the inexplicable atmospheric changes, the disconnect between their experiences and instrument readings. Sarah's heart pounded as she made her decision. She would trust her gut and the birds. "Tom," she said, her voice filled with newfound determination, "we're going to deviate from our course. Those birds have been trying to tell us something, and I think I finally understand." Tom nodded, a mix of trust and apprehension in his eyes. "I'm with you, Sarah. What's the plan?" Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She knew her decision would be questioned, perhaps even ridiculed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was their only chance. Reaching for the intercom, Sarah addressed the passengers, her voice calm and authoritative despite the turmoil in her mind. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to unexpected weather conditions, we will be deviating from our original flight path. Please remain in your seats with your seat belts fastened. I assure you we are taking all necessary precautions to ensure your safety." As murmurs of concern rippled through the cabin, Sarah turned her attention back to navigating. She began to adjust their course, following the persistent guidance of the sandpipers. As the plane banked, following its new course, the green haze outside seemed to pulse and swirl. Sarah focused on the instruments, which still showed clear skies and the persistent flock of birds guiding them. She sent up a silent prayer, hoping that her instincts and these mysterious avian guides would lead them to safety. Immediately, Captain Miller's heart raced as she relayed her suspicions to air traffic control. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the radio. "Denver Center, Flight 237. We've deviated from our course based on unusual circumstances. We suspect there might be a weather system our instruments aren't detecting. Can you confirm?" There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Sarah and Tom exchanged tense glances, the green haze outside the cockpit window seeming to pulse with anticipation. Suddenly the radio crackled to life. The controller's voice came through, filled with a mix of disbelief and urgency. "Flight 237, we've just received reports of a massive, unprecedented thunderstorm forming in your original flight path. It's not showing up on our radar. We don't understand how this is possible, but you've avoided flying directly into it. How did you know?" Sarah's eyes widened, a wave of relief and amazement washing over her. She looked at the flock of sandpipers, still visible through the eerie green sky, continuing their persistent guidance. "Tom," she whispered, her voice filled with awe, "they knew. Somehow they knew." Tom nodded, a look of wonder on his face. "I can't believe it. Those birds, they saved us." Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself before responding to air traffic control. "Denver Center, it's a long story. Let's just say we had some unexpected help from Mother Nature." As the reality of their narrow escape sank in, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude towards their feathered guides. She made a silent promise to herself and to the birds. Keying the intercom, Sarah addressed the passengers, her voice filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'm pleased to inform you that we've successfully navigated around a severe weather system. We're now on course for a safe landing. I want to thank you for your patience and trust during this unusual flight." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "I also want to extend a special thanks to our unexpected companions on this journey. Those birds you see outside, they've played a crucial role in guiding us to safety. We owe them our gratitude." A murmur of amazement rippled through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to look out the windows, seeing the flock of sandpipers in a new light. As they approached the airport, the green haze began to dissipate, revealing clear skies. Sarah focused all her skills on delivering the smooth landing she had promised. The wheels touched down with barely a bump, eliciting a collective sigh of relief from the passengers and crew. As the plane taxied to the gate, a chorus of chirps filled the air. The sandpipers, their mission accomplished, began to disperse, flying off into the blue sky. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself reflecting deeply on the experience. She, who had always relied on instruments and data, had been saved by trusting in something she couldn't explain. It was a humbling realization. And so Captain Miller's leap of faith not only saved the day, but also changed her perspective forever. Have you ever experienced a moment where trusting your instincts paid off against all odds? Share your stories in the comments below. Catch you in the next one.